Hey everybody, thank you guys for coming out today. So we're going to talk about how you can figure out how your company will get to profitability. It's a long and murky road, but some of these guys, like Brian's company Keep, have already done it, whereas Scully and Poshmark are figuring out different strategies of what they're going to do in terms of balancing market share versus margins to make sure that eventually they can get to profitability. So I want to start off talking with you. So why don't you guys first just go through and tell us a little bit about like who you are and what your companies do.
My name is Marcus Weller, founder and CEO of Scully Helmets.
Speak up a little bit.
And we make augmented reality motorcycle helmets. Basically, they are helmets that have a heads-up display. And in that heads-up display, you'll see a 180-degree viewing angle rear view camera, as well as GPS navigation. And so it's really targeted at finally making the helmet prevent the accident in the first place.
My name is Tracy Son. I'm a founder and head of merchandising for Poshmark. Poshmark is a peer-to-peer marketplace for fashion. So basically, we are mostly mobile, and we allow women to put their closets up online for sale and also shop each other's closets.
Hi, I'm Brian, founder and CEO of Keep. We take existing moments, as we call them, in the apps and games that you already use. So imagine leveling up in a game, or finishing off a to-do, or logging a run. And in that moment, you could be serendipitously rewarded by a brand. So imagine logging a run and getting a free bottle of Gatorade. And so the wearable relevancy for us is we, a month ago, announced the world's first rewards in a connected car. So the concept is if you, let's say the car knows you're about to need an oil change, in the moment, Midas, for example, can reward you with a free oil change. So the idea is taking moment sources and data from other areas outside of just the phone and in other platforms.
And I'm your moderator, Josh Constein. I'm a writer for TechCrunch. I've been there for 2.5 years, and before that I was at Stanford University studying a master's degree I designed called Cyber Sociology, looking at how humans interact over the internet. And I've been covering marketplaces, wearables, startups, and specifically how startups can really make money for TechCrunch for a few years now. And I think one of the big questions that companies have to ask themselves is, what does the market look like for them right now? Are you in a space filled with lots of competitors, or are you sort of going it alone? So I want to hear a little bit about how did you guys come up with how you were going to make money off of Scully? Like, what was the market research phase? Because I think before you even started making money, you need to be building a product that people will eventually pay for. And that takes a lot of market research. Sometimes you can think that you have a great idea, but until you've gotten out of the building and talked to a ton of people and everyone tells you, yes, this is what we want and we will pay for it, you shouldn't be building prototypes, shouldn't be coding anything until you know what people actually want. So tell us a little bit about how you went through that process with Scully.
Well, it kind of started as that I was solving my own problems. So I was in a motorcycle accident and discovered that it was just really difficult to navigate or to use some of these creature comforts that we take for granted in automotive. And so
you can't really pull out your phone and look at Google Maps when you're on a motorcycle.
Exactly. You definitely should not be doing that. And so basically, once we had the idea and it sort of crystallized and we got it on paper, I started going out to bars and I started telling people about this helmet and that I had it in my trunk and asked them if they wanted to buy it. And that's how we eventually kind of arrived at a price point that made sense. So it varied between $800 and $3,000, and that was kind of our initial
Is that where the word
research.
bootstrapping comes from, like selling from the boot of your car?
Pretty much.
So how did you take in the requests for features and eventually turn that into a prototype?
Well, it really was about parsing down the features. So the initial idea had a lot of features in it, like self-charging using a wind turbine and front-facing camera and a lot of other features. And so really the key for us was to identify what are the minimum viable set of features that we could go to market with that people would pay money for. And so it was really taking a sort of a problem-centered approach or a human-centered approach and saying, what does the human need to safely get from point A to point B? What is that minimum feature set, and how valuable is that to the customer?
Cool. And so once you have a long-term vision of what you want the product to be, you've got something you think people will definitely pay for, it's a matter of sometimes getting there, and that can often be a bit of a curvy route. It's not always just, oh, I'm going to build the things that people want, because you have to fund that first. So Brian, with your company, you guys build this, you build Keep and offer it as a platform that other apps can license into their platform to offer to monetize. But you knew that you had to prove it out first before anyone was going to license this. So how did you get to that position?
Well, yeah, I think even before that, the evolution was picking the first source of moments or pool of moments that we knew that people would want to be rewarded in. And the first was games, right? So games was sort of like the original core DNA of Keep, continues to be where we learn a lot about sort of what an achievement matters or what is emotionally meaningful to someone. So we borrowed those concepts and started looking at, moments within, fitness and sports and travel and music and productivity. And so we used brand dollars in the beginning, so primarily advertising and when you look at a brand, when they look at something, they go, wow, this is, another way to engage a consumer, so yeah, I'm gonna spend advertising bucks on it. And that's usually the first line of defense for them. Those are the loosest, arguably, budgets they have. The biggest, they have to be spent on a schedule, whether it be seasonal or quarterly or monthly or whatever it is they end up spending on. Those are the things that we ended up using. So using that to prove it out, people then went, they go, well, where's your platform embedded? I'm like, 3,000 apps. Like, well, that's great. Well, then I guess I could use it for my own ecosystem. So it was really to prove out what mattered. And so I think when you look at the benefits of this ecosystem we're all in or very interested in around wearables, it's like it's a new platform that could be exploited in a very good way because there are rules that have not even been defined yet. So the way that we're monetizing off of that is that a lot of wearables have app companions, right? So you can imagine like a Withings has an app, am I pronouncing it right? A Withings? Anyways, they have an app with their scale and their blood pressure monitor, blah, blah, blah. The app is still going to be the main interface, at least for a visual standpoint, or an audience standpoint, with the consumer. So if you could just be in the app and be able to reward moments on the app, but that the data that comes to that app is from a wearable, that is a way to make good money off of that type of an audience.
Yeah, and you guys went through brands as a great source of money. I mean,
Yeah.
there's crowdfunding and there's venture capitalists, but brands have very deep pockets, and I think a lot of them really want to be aligned with cool new wearable technology. Obviously there's some parts of the wearable scene that have a bit of a stigma against them, but there's other parts that really make people think about, wow, like if anyone who's aligned with that is thinking really in the future, and a lot of brands want that kind of cachet. So I recommend, you can, as a wearable company, you can talk to these brands and reach out and say like, hey, we've got something really cool we want to bring you in on the ground level. In some cases, you can take sponsorship money instead of having to take venture capital for equity.
And they won't look at just audience. So for example, you were asking like, how many more of these devices do you need? So for me, we realized that, so the first thing with a connected car, there's really not going to be too many connected cars that we'll be able to reward into, but the volume is less meaningful if you know that the type of engagement is really, really meaningful. So the person actually gets value from it. So I think one thing that it's so coincidental that yesterday obviously was the keynote for WWDC, and you hear about HomeKit and HealthKit. HomeKit and HealthKit alone are going to make this commercially viable on a massive scale, just because all the developers are going to have access to it, all the devices are going to have the health app on it. So when you go to a brand and like look no further than the phone that your kid has or that you have to see the benefits of the data that are going to come from wearables and how that could impact you as a brand.
So once you have your vision of what you want to build and you know how to get there, I think it's a question of choosing a price point. And that can be really important for wearables because a device could be cool, but it could be cool enough that I'll buy it at $100, but I won't buy it at $150. And finding that price point can be the make or break for your company. So for Scully, how did you guys get into determining exactly what your price point was?
We just took a guess. No, I'm kidding.
Please tell me you did not do that. They did not do that for the record.
In the beginning, it's very much like, what the fuck will you pay for it? And my favorite is whenever like the brands are like, well, how much do you charge for something like this? I'm like, $1 million, right? It's just like, what do you want me to say? Like when you ask me how much should you pay me? Well, obviously it's like, so I think you have like comps, obviously, but you don't want to be too comparable because that means that they'll start to consider you're in the same consideration set.
Right, especially if you're creating sort of a new sort of product category, it's really important that you sort of look at what is the value you're delivering ultimately to the customer. For us, we really realized that we were a convergence device and that we had a number of features and things that people were paying for, like GoPros and GPS devices and earbuds and iPods and all these things that they use to get some of the creature comforts that you would get typically in automotive and put them in their helmet. By the time we added up a premium helmet and some of these devices, we were well over our targeted price point. And so we basically said, okay, what is the market able to tolerate? And so what is the essential value that we're delivering to the customer, and we base the price on that model.
So what's your projected price point for when you start pre-sales?
We like to say we're like Google Glass, except we can save your life.
So does that mean like around $1,500? Because that's around where
it'll probably be somewhere in that price range. We'll release pricing in the fall.
Right. So but you guys don't have a ton of competitors in your space right now, do you?
Well, there are the incumbents that are the traditional helmets. They're foam and plastic shells, and that industry has remained pretty stagnant. It's been about the same for about the last 5 decades, and so it definitely is creating a new product category, and we expect there to be a lot of follow-on competitors once we've demonstrated that there's a market here.
Right, but I think it's important to understand that, like, at that early stage, if you don't have a ton of competitors directly trying to do what you're doing, you have a little bit more flexibility to go for having a higher margin and earlier profitability, because you don't have to worry about getting undercut by, you know, another heads-up display, wearable, high-tech connected motorcycle helmet.
Right.
Cool. And so, Tracy, tell us a little bit about how you guys came to choose how much you guys were going to charge as a commission. So with Poshmark, people sell their clothes to each other. It's a peer-to-peer marketplace, and Poshmark takes a cut. You guys take 20%.
Yeah, we take 20%.
Great. And so tell us, how did you settle on that percentage point?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of value in doing a lot of market research and talking to people. So in the early days, we talked to hundreds. I personally interviewed hundreds of women. And out of all the interviews I did, not one person mentioned price as something they cared about. So all they wanted to do is just make it easy for me, make it mobile, make it social, make it super simple. And so we focused on that, and we kept our commission at 20%, which is a little bit on the high side. On the flip side, right, our buyers, all they want is discounted shipping. That's all they want. They don't even want to pay. We give them an extra $1 off, and sales go through the roof. So we focused a lot of our dollars on subsidizing the buying end, and we kept the supply end at 20%.
And so, but you guys have a lot of competitors. Since you've started into the business, there's been a lot of people coming in. And how does your price point stack up against theirs?
So yeah, so we launched about 2.5 years ago, and since then, a boatload of competitors have, we pioneered the space, and a lot of people are in it now. It's really crowded. Some people are matching our price point, some people are lower. From what I can tell, the consumers actually, it's still too early, and they don't really care. So they're going to where the best experience is, and they're going to where they get liquidity, which right now we're the largest player.
But in your case, you guys have a lot of competitors, so you know there's probably a lot of demand for this space. It's just a matter of who's going to be the brand that emerges as the winner. And so you guys opted to take venture capital, right? So how much have you guys raised now?
Raised 15.5.
Right, so raising $15.5 million gives you a lot more freedom to delay profitability and offer a lower price point in terms of your commission, which helps you to keep relevant and competitive with other people in the space, because you don't have to worry about you don't need to make money right away. And so I think, like, understanding, like, taking funding is a matter of understanding if you need to make money now or if you need to make money later. And if you have the option, if you need to get growth now and can then delaying profitability until later by raising venture capital, I think is like a really strong perspective to take.
I think you raise a great point about the brand. I think the big opportunity for anybody interested in creating or already created a company around this whole new dynamic of connected devices is that you can stake your claim early in the branding of the category that you're trying to make, and those rules you get to set. And the difference here between just the phone and now in connected homes and connected cars, and obviously motorcycles and the like, is you're actually now a brand that a consumer needs to be comfortable inviting into their home, and inviting into their car, and inviting into their face, and or wearing it. And Google obviously is a very trusted brand, but the whole idea is for that trust to be there is incredibly important, and that's where you can cement yourself early on and ensure that no one else catches up. I'm sure Poshmark has that brand that people go, well, yes, I trust that whatever is being consigned to me there is something that I actually appreciate.
Yeah, and I would even add to that wearables, by nature of what it is, you're wearing it, right? Yeah. And so it's the ultimate accessory. And we were just chatting earlier, the Scully helmets they look awesome. So if you haven't checked them out, go upstairs and check them out. But they look cool, right? And we were just saying how that's almost like the number one thing you want is it looks cool, and then it does all this cool technology.
Fashion
right?
first. I actually think fashion is going to be, at least part of the industry is going to have a revitalization with wearables being part of it. You look at Shine, a Misfit, what they did with the little pendant thing. I don't wear accessories, as you can tell. The whole idea is
you're wearing a wearable
you've got
wristband
two
right
pairs
now.
of
well,
glasses on.
not for beauty reasons, but and then but the thing is really cool because they are focused on how it looks too. And that's what I think is going to be the game changer for a lot of companies.
Yeah, I think that's a huge insight. I mean, Google is learning that very viscerally right now. I've heard from sources that they're like actively hiring basically anyone they can that has that fashion.
Apple now
tech
has like
experience.
Burberry, and what other brands do they hire now? And so Angela from Burberry, and who's the other person that they hired, the high profile person? Oh, YSL, Yves Saint Laurent guy. They hired 2 super huge fashion names into their executive team. I would imagine culturally that makes it even less just about industrial design, which obviously Johnny Ive has done really well in, but like the elegance of it, I think, in lifestyle is incredibly important.
So wearable startups should probably be out there at like the Academy of Art trying to recruit people.
Hire Parsons people. There's so many fashion grads that are hungry to help out and have that sense of style, I think is really important.
Yeah, CCA in San Francisco is one of the best design schools in the country, and we hired somebody, Robert Gomez, who actually did our video, and that video now has almost 1 million views online. And I mean, it's so important to establish the brand through design early on and generate the demand and create the market before you actually build it. I mean, so many people go out and they spend all of this money, either their own money or investor money, before they've established that there's a true need or a desire to purchase a product. And I think that that's such a key opportunity and touch point with the consumer base, is to both set the brand and set the design tone and really the design ethos.
And just to tie that back to our original conversation, like people will pay for brand, right? So because it's emotional, it's not rational. You just love it. You just need to have it. You'll pay almost anything for brand. Once you can start defining the features and stuff, then it becomes a little bit more difficult.
And I feel like there's the wearable space is filled with a lot of hackers, a lot of like real do-it-yourselfers, people who want to go it alone to some degree. But the end results for exits for startups are very binary in the sense that companies either usually make a ton of money or they don't make any money. And in the end, those percentage points you give away for the equity early on that could help you establish yourself as the front-running brand in a new category, which is a huge opportunity for a lot of wearable startups, that equity doesn't end up being a big difference. Like, you either get rich or you don't. It's not like, oh, I got rich, but I'm so pissed that I gave away that extra 5% so that I could have that $1 million early on. It's like, no, that $1 million is what helped make you the front-running brand. And so I think a lot of startups need to be wearable startups need to be thinking about, like, how can I capitalize early? How can I get out there, show that there's demand for my product? In some cases, using earlier today, I did a panel with the co-founder of Indiegogo, and she says that a lot of startups that are especially in the hardware space, that are trying to raise VC funding are finding it a lot easier if they actually do crowdfunding first, and they show that, yeah, we found 100,000 people, or we found 10,000 people that wanted to buy our product, and it hardly even exists yet, that they found that the VC money came a lot easier. So I know that there's a lot of wearable startups out there trying to compete, but I still think that there's a lot of money out there. There's a lot of equity crowdfunding options like Funders Club. So get out there and get that money earlier. I want to see if we have, is there one question in the crowd? Does anyone have like a super burning question that they just have to ask these people right now? Because I always have more burning questions. Yeah, we got right here. I'll repeat your question so people can hear it. So what are the scaling issues that Scully faces?
You certainly need to have the right partnership network that's going to help you get to scale. And so it would be sort of novice to not start from that point. So for us, very early on, we looked at what are the major incumbents in our industry, who are they using to do mass manufacturing and design, and to get in touch with those people very early on. So those were some of the first activities we took as a company. So I think partnerships, that the importance cannot be overstated.
So to look at what we talked about and learned in the panel, we talked about that you need to be laying out your platform, your strategy from the early point, and looking at how you can step back and work backwards towards that end goal. Usually that means doing a ton of market research, like Poshmark. Tracy did hundreds of interviews with women, her potential customers, before they decided on what they really wanted to build. Marcus, you talked to tons of people in bars and tons of motorcycle riders about specifically what they wanted, and you learned that it turned out, yeah, there's lots of features that people want, but there's only a few that are really the core ones that they have to have. Focus on building those core features which you can get to at an affordable price point. And when you're choosing your price point, look at if you have tons of competitors, you may need to be lowering your price point, reducing your margin, but going for market share early so you can box everyone else out. Whereas if you have fewer competitors, you can go with a little bit higher of a price point, earn a higher margin. But if you really want to win in the game, you're probably going to need to create a big mind share for your brand first. And a lot of times that means getting out there early with a lot of great marketing and great partnerships, great sponsorships. And that means either raising money or through crowdfunding or going through venture capital. So really, don't worry about those last few percentage points. Worry about getting the market share for your brand. Thank you guys very much for coming, and thank you guys for all watching.
Thanks, guys.